On a transatlantic flight cruising at 37,000 feet, the cabin is a world unto itself, sealed off from the earth below. For most passengers, it's a few hours of mild discomfort and quiet anticipation. But on Global Voyager Flight 287, this pressurized tube of metal and plastic became a crucible. It was here that a simple request for a glass of water ignited a firestorm of prejudice, courage, and ultimately, a devastating reckoning. This isn't just a story about a flight attendant and a soldier. It's a story about the unseen battles fought far from any war zone, the quiet dignity of a true hero, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the universe has a way of delivering karma with pinpoint accuracy, ensuring that the bill for our actions always comes due. The air inside the Boeing 777 was a familiar cocktail of recycled oxygen jet fuel fumes and the faint cloying scent of 1,000 different perfumes. Sergeant Jackson Jack Carter barely noticed. For him, the air had tasted of sand and cordite for the better part of a year. This sterile, temperature-controlled environment felt alien, a decompression chamber between two vastly different worlds. He sat in seat 24B, an economy plus accommodation that felt both spacious and suffocating. His uniform, the Army Green Service uniform, was immaculate. The jacket was perfectly pressed, the ribbons on his chest a silent testament to places he'd been and things he'd done, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the dim cabin lights. He was flying from the Ramstein Air Base in Germany to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International, a final leg on a long journey home. He was not returning for a parade or a welcome party. He was returning to deliver a folded flag. His large frame was tense, coiled with a weariness that went bone deep. His gaze was fixed on the seat back in front of him, but his mind was miles away, replaying the chaotic final moments of Specialist Michael Peterson's life. The dust, the shouts, the sudden shocking silence. Jack had promised Peterson's mother he would be there for the memorial, that he would tell her what a fine man her son was. It was a promise that felt heavier than any rucksack he'd ever carried. A few rows ahead in the galley, Brenda Sullivan was preparing for the first beverage service. At 52, Brenda had been a flight attendant for nearly 3 decades. The smile she once offered passengers had long since curdled into a permanent mask of strained politeness. Today the mask was particularly thin. A pre-dawn text from her son Jonathan, asking for another loan to keep his startup afloat, had soured her mood before she even put on her uniform. Then there was the mortgage payment that was somehow higher than she remembered, and the persistent ache in her lower back that a double dose of ibuprofen couldn't touch. The world, as far as Brenda was concerned, was a series of relentless demands and disappointments. Her eyes scanned the passenger manifest on her tablet, her lips twisting into a subtle sneer. She saw the notation active military personnel. Her gaze flicked down the aisle and settled on the uniformed figure in 24B. Her resentment, a bitter, acidic thing, began to bubble in her chest. She saw not a man, but a symbol of the vast, grinding military machine that in her mind was the source of so many of the world's and her own problems. Her son Jonathan had been smart enough to avoid it. He was a thinker, an entrepreneur, a creator. He hadn't needed to hide behind a uniform and a government paycheck. He was making his own way. Her pride in him was fierce, a protective shield she used to deflect her own anxieties about his precarious finances. These soldiers, she thought, were different. They were cogs willingly submitting to a system she found abhorrent, a system that glorified violence and drained the nation's resources. As she began pushing the heavy beverage cart into the economy cabin, her movements were sharp, efficient, and devoid of warmth. Drinks, she'd snap her eyes, already looking past the passenger she was addressing to the next one in line. She was a study in practiced indifference. In seat 22A, Olivia Reed was typing furiously on her laptop, trying to finish a freelance piece on sustainable travel before her battery died. A young, sharp-eyed journalist with an insatiable curiosity, Olivia noticed everything. She noticed the slight tremble in the hands of the young man in 22C, clearly a nervous flyer. She noticed the way the couple across the aisle held hands, their knuckles white. And she noticed the simmering hostility radiating from the flight attendant, Brenda. It was more than just the end-of-shift fatigue Olivia had seen on countless flights. This was something deeper, a curdled sort of anger that seemed to be looking for a target. When the cart reached her row, Olivia asked for a ginger ale. Brenda poured it without a word, her movements jerky, sloshing a bit of the liquid over the rim of the plastic cup. Olivia watched as the cart moved on her journalistic instincts, humming. She saw the cart stop next to Sergeant Carter. She saw the way Brenda's posture stiffened, her chin lifting in a gesture of subtle defiance. The drama Olivia sensed was about to begin. Jack had been dozing lightly, the drone of the engines, a familiar lullaby. He became aware of the cart's squeaky wheel beside him and opened his eyes. He wasn't thirsty, but the cabin air was dry, and a simple glass of water felt like a necessity. When Brenda stood before him, her face a thundercloud of impatience, he offered a small, tired nod. "Anything to drink?" she asked, the words clipped. Her eyes did a slow, deliberate sweep of his uniform, from the polished boots she could just see under the seat in front of him, up to the ribbons on his chest, and finally meeting his eyes with a look that was unmistakably dismissive. "Just a water, please." "No ice." Jack said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was a voice accustomed to giving commands, but now it was soft, tinged with exhaustion. Brenda's hands, which had been hovering over the bottles and cans, stilled. She straightened up fully, her 5'4" frame, attempting to project an authority it didn't possess. "We'll be coming through with a full water service for the cabin after the meal," she stated flatly. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a dismissal. Jack blinked slowly. He looked at the cart laden with water bottles, juice cartons, and soda cans. He looked at the passenger in the aisle seat next to him, who was currently sipping on a freshly poured Coke. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "I see you have water right there," he said, his tone still polite, just a simple statement of fact. "I'd just like one of those if you don't mind." Brenda's lips thinned into a razor-sharp line. "The cart service is for premium beverages. Water will be distributed later." It was a lie, and a flimsy one at that. Water was the most basic offering on the cart. Everyone knew it. Every passenger on that plane knew it. It was in that moment that the sterile, controlled environment of the cabin began to change. The low hum of conversations faltered. The man next to Jack lowered his Coke, a frown creasing his forehead. Across the aisle, Olivia Reed stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she watched the scene unfold. Her reporter's brain cataloguing every detail, the flight attendant's rigid posture, the soldier's weary patience, the palpable shift in the atmosphere. The quiet ascent over the Atlantic had ended. They were now entering a zone of unexpected and severe turbulence, and it had nothing to do with the weather. The silence that descended upon row 24 was thick and uncomfortable. It was a pocket of stillness in the otherwise monotonous drone of the aircraft, a vacuum that drew the attention of the surrounding passengers. Jack Carter held Brenda Sullivan's gaze, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was too tired for anger. He was confused, and a deep, familiar sense of resignation was beginning to settle in his gut. He had faced down armed insurgents in dusty villages and navigated treacherous mountain passes under the cover of darkness. The idea that he was now being denied a simple glass of water felt absurd, a bizarre postscript to a brutal chapter of his life. "Ma'am," he began again, his voice steady and low deliberately, keeping it respectful. "I'm not asking for anything special. Just a bottle of water. I can see you have several." He gestured with a slight nod of his head toward the cart, where a neat row of Dasani bottles sat sweating in the cabin air. Brenda felt a surge of righteous indignation. How dare he question her? How dare he sit there in that costume of state-sanctioned aggression and make demands? Her personal grievances, her financial worries, her resentment toward the military-industrial complex. It all coalesced and focused on the man in front of her. He became the repository for all her frustrations. "Sir," she said, her voice acquiring a sharp, lecturing tone that made several passengers flinch. "As I have already explained, that is not how our service is structured on this flight. You will have to wait." She made a move to push the cart forward, to dismiss him and end the conversation. It was the man in the aisle seat, a portly sales executive named Richard, who spoke up first. "For crying out loud, just give the man a water." He grumbled loud enough for the rows in front and behind to hear. "What's the big deal?" Brenda's head snapped toward Richard, her eyes flashing with fury. "I will not be told how to do my job, sir. Please remain quiet, and I will get to you in a moment." Her sharp retort had the opposite effect she intended. Instead of quelling the dissent, it fanned the flames. A young woman, a few rows back, called out, "He's a soldier. Show some respect. Respect is earned." Brenda shot back over her shoulder a venomous retort that she immediately regretted but was too proud to retract. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Jack flinched not at the insult to himself, but at the scene that was unfolding. He never sought attention. His entire training was about moving unseen, about achieving the objective without fanfare. This public spectacle was his worst nightmare. He just wanted to be invisible, to retreat into his grief and complete his grim mission. He raised a hand, a gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said, his voice directed at the other passengers who were now murmuring their disapproval. "It's fine. I can wait." He leaned back in his seat, hoping to de-escalate, to simply make it all go away. But Brenda wouldn't let it go. His calm defiance, his quiet dignity, enraged her more than any outburst would have. She saw it as a passive-aggressive challenge to her authority. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper that was somehow more insulting than her shouts. "You people are all the same," she hissed, her face just inches from his. "You think that uniform entitles you to special treatment, that the rules don't apply to you. Well, they do. On my plane, everyone is treated equally." The hypocrisy of the statement was breathtaking. The word people, loaded with a poison she barely bothered to conceal, struck Jack harder than any physical blow. It was an old, familiar sting. He had felt it as a kid in a neighborhood that didn't want him, as a teenager pulled over for no reason. He had foolishly thought, or perhaps hoped, that the uniform, the flag on his shoulder, might have transcended that. He was wrong. Olivia Reed, 2 rows up, had her phone out. She wasn't recording video that felt too intrusive, too exploitative, but she was audio recording the exchange, her thumb hovering over the button. Her mind was racing. This was no longer a minor spat. This was a clear-cut case of discrimination, made all the more egregious by the context. The flight attendant's justification was a lie, her prejudice laid bare for everyone to see. Jack finally looked up, and for the first time the exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of cold, hard fire. It was the look of a man who had been pushed past a line, yet his voice remained impossibly calm. "Ma'am," he said, his words precise and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the cabin. "My people have been serving this country and defending the rights of people like you to say whatever you want for generations. This uniform doesn't entitle me to special treatment. It does, however, denote a service that should at the very least afford me the same basic courtesy as any other passenger on this aircraft. I have asked you politely for a glass of water. You have refused for reasons you cannot coherently explain. Now I am asking you one more time. May I please have a bottle of water?" The entire section of the plane was now dead silent. Every eye was on Brenda. She was trapped. To acquiesce now would be to admit defeat. To refuse would escalate the situation beyond her control. Her face was flushed a blotchy red creeping up her neck. She was cornered, and like a cornered animal, she lashed out. "No," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You will get nothing from me. If you have a problem, you can take it up with the captain when we land." She gave the cart a violent shove, rattling the bottles and cans, and moved on to the next row, her hands shaking as she tried to pour a ginger ale for Richard, who simply stared at her in disgust and shook his head, refusing the drink. Jack sat back in his seat and closed his eyes. He didn't press the call button. He didn't argue further. He simply retreated into himself. But the line had been drawn. The insult had been delivered. And in the cockpit, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the cabin, Captain Robert Miller was about to be drawn into it. A junior flight attendant, a young man named Kevin, who had witnessed the entire exchange with wide-eyed horror, was hesitantly walking toward the front of the plane. He knew he was breaking protocol by disturbing the pilots mid-flight for a non-emergency. But he also knew that what he had just seen was fundamentally wrong. He knocked softly on the cockpit door. First Officer Alex Garcia answered the knock, cracking the cockpit door open. He saw the young flight attendant Kevin standing there, his face pale and his expression deeply troubled. "Everything all right back there, Kevin?" Alex asked, his voice low. "Sir, I think the captain needs to be aware of a situation in the main cabin." Kevin stammered, wringing his hands. It's about Brenda and a passenger. Captain Robert Miller, a man in his late 50s with a calm, authoritative demeanor that came from 30 years of flying, overheard the exchange. He swiveled his chair around. "A passenger issue?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Is it a medical emergency?" "No, sir. It's a conduct issue. With Brenda." Miller's frown deepened. He had flown with Brenda Sullivan for years. He knew her to be efficient, if chronically unpleasant. He'd heard whispers of her abrasive personality from other crew members, but he'd never witnessed anything that crossed a line. "Explain," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for equivocation. Kevin quickly and quietly recounted the entire incident, the soldier's polite request, Brenda's nonsensical refusal, her escalating hostility, and her final venomous comments. He repeated her words. "You people are all the same, and respect is earned." His voice laced with disbelief. As Miller listened, his calm expression hardened into one of granite resolve. He was a third-generation military man. His father had flown B-17s over Germany, and he himself had spent a decade flying C-130s in the Air Force before transitioning to commercial aviation. The uniform on the soldier in 24B was more than just clothing to him. It was a sacred cloth, a symbol of a shared brotherhood of service and sacrifice. The idea that a member of his crew would treat any passenger with such contempt was infuriating. That the passenger was a soldier in uniform was to him an unforgivable offense. "Alex, you have the controls," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He unbuckled his harness. "Kevin, go back to the galley. Tell Brenda Sullivan I want to see her in the forward galley. Now!" Kevin scurried away, relieved and terrified in equal measure. Alex Garcia simply nodded, his eyes fixed on his instruments, but he could feel the temperature in the small cockpit drop several degrees. He'd never seen the captain this angry. Brenda was fuming near her station, trying to pretend that nothing had happened when Kevin delivered the message. A cold knot of fear formed in her stomach. A summons from the captain mid-flight was serious. She tried to compare herself, rehearsing her justifications as she walked the long aisle to the front of the plane. He was being demanding. I was following procedure. I was treating everyone equally. The lies sounded hollow, even in her own mind. She found Captain Miller standing in the small galley area, his arms crossed over his chest. His 6'2" frame seemed to fill the entire space, his presence immense. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Brenda," he began, his voice a low, rumbling growl. "I have been made aware of an incident with the passenger in seat 24B. Tell me exactly what happened." She launched into her prepared speech, painting herself as the victim of a difficult and entitled passenger. He was insistent, Captain. He was demanding special treatment because of his uniform, and our policy is to treat all passengers the same. I was simply maintaining order and following protocol about the beverage service. Miller cut her off with a sharp, decisive slice of his hand. "Stop. Do not lie to me, Brenda. There is no protocol that denies a passenger a bottle of water from a fully stocked cart. I was informed, you told him, and I quote, 'You people are all the same.' Is that correct?" Brenda paled. She opened her mouth to deny it, to twist the words, but the look in Miller's eyes, a look of pure, undiluted disgust, stopped her. She stammered. It was taken out of context. There is no context in which that sentiment is acceptable on my aircraft. Miller snapped, his voice, still low, but now laced with steel. There is no context in which you, an employee of this airline and a member of my crew, will deny a basic courtesy to a paying passenger, let alone a man wearing the uniform of this nation's armed forces. You are a disgrace to that uniform you're wearing." He pointed at the Global Voyager wings pinned to her jacket. "You are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. You will remain in a jump seat in the rear of the aircraft. You will not interact with any more passengers. Is that understood?" Tears of humiliation and rage welled in Brenda's eyes. "You can't do that. I have a job to do." "You have already failed at your job," Miller countered coldly. "My decision is final. Now go." Defeated Brenda turned and walked the aisle of shame back to the rear galley, feeling the curious and condemning eyes of the passengers on her. Captain Miller watched her go, his jaw tight. Then he turned to Kevin. "Get me a bottle of water, the finest, most expensive bottle of water we have on this plane, and find out the sergeant's name for me." A minute later, bottle in hand, Miller emerged from the galley. He strode down the aisle, his pilot's uniform as crisp and commanding as the soldiers. The passengers watched rapt as he walked directly to row 24. He stopped and stood before Jack Carter, who looked up startled to see the captain standing before him. Sergeant Carter Miller asked, his voice now gentle, respectful. "Yes, sir," Jack replied automatically, starting to sit up straighter. Miller held up a hand. "As you were, Sergeant. I'm Captain Robert Miller." He extended the chilled bottle of Fiji water. "On behalf of Global Voyager Airlines and myself personally, I want to apologize. There is no excuse for the treatment you received from my crew member. It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and it will be dealt with in the severest of terms." Jack took the bottle, his fingers brushing the captain's. "Thank you, sir. That's not necessary." "It is absolutely necessary," Miller insisted. He looked at the ribbons on Jack's chest, his eyes lingering on a bronze star. He knew what that meant. He knew the cost. "I flew C-130s for 10 years. Saw my fair share of sand, too. Where are you headed home from Kandahar? By way of Ramstein?" "Sir," Jack said quietly. Miller nodded, a world of understanding passing between the two men. They were of different generations, different branches, different ranks, but they spoke the same language. Then Captain Miller did something that sent a collective gasp through the cabin. He straightened to his full height, brought his heels together with a soft click, and raised his hand in a sharp, perfect military salute. He then turned to the cabin, walked to the front, and picked up the intercom handset. His voice boomed through the aircraft, firm and clear, not a tremor of emotion in it. Yet it was the most emotional sound many on board had ever heard. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I would like to take a moment to publicly apologize to the uniformed service member in seat 24B for the deplorable lack of respect he was just shown. We have active duty military personnel and veterans on this flight, and they deserve our utmost gratitude and respect. In my cockpit and on my aircraft, they will always have it." He paused, then continued, his voice resonating with profound sincerity. "Sergeant Carter, thank you for your service to our country. Welcome home." He hung up the handset, and then spontaneously, a wave of applause erupted through the cabin. It started in the front and rolled all the way to the back, a thunderous, sustained ovation. Passengers were on their feet, craning their necks to see the soldier, Jack Carter. A man who actively shunned the spotlight could do nothing but sit there, stunned, the cold water bottle in his hand, a single hot tear tracing a path through the dust that still clung to his weary face. Olivia Reed, watching it all, knew she was witnessing more than just a story. It was a defining moment of character, for better and for worse, playing out at 37,000 feet. The remainder of the flight passed in a state of surreal calm. The applause eventually subsided, but the atmosphere in the cabin had been irrevocably altered. The invisible walls between strangers had crumbled, replaced by a shared sense of witness. Passengers exchanged knowing glances and whispered conversations. Several people, as they passed by on their way to the lavatory, paused at row 24. A grey-haired man in a crisp business suit leaned down and whispered, "Thank you for what you do, son." A young mother with a toddler on her hip simply smiled and nodded, a look of profound respect in her eyes. Jack, deeply uncomfortable with the attention, but touched by the sentiment, could only nod back, his throat tight with an emotion he couldn't name. He finally opened the bottle of Fiji water Captain Miller had given him. The water was cold and clean, and as he drank it felt like it was washing away more than just the dryness in his throat. It was a small gesture of kindness that felt monumental a counterweight to the ugliness that had preceded it. He spent the rest of the flight staring out the small oval window at the endless expanse of blue above and the brilliant white cloudscape below his thoughts, turning once again to specialist Michael Peterson. Michael had been a kid from rural Ohio, barely 20 years old, with a goofy grin and an almost reckless bravery. He'd been the platoon's joker, the one who could always find a reason to laugh, even when they were all miserable, hungry, and scared. In his wallet, Jack carried a worn photograph of Michael grinning with his arm slung around another soldier. Michael had been killed by an IED while trying to drag a wounded comrade to safety. It was a textbook act of heroism that would earn him a posthumous Silver Star. But all Jack could think about was the unbearable silence that had followed the blast and the promise he had made to Michael's mother. The memorial service was in 2 days in a small town outside Columbus. He had to be strong for her. He had to honor his friend's memory. Meanwhile, in the rear jump seat, Brenda Sullivan stewed in a toxic brew of humiliation and fury. She felt utterly betrayed. In her mind, Captain Miller hadn't just disciplined her. He had sided with the enemy, with a symbol of everything she loathed. He had publicly shamed her, turned the entire plane against her. She composed furious text messages to her son Jonathan, framing the narrative to fit her sense of victimhood. At a terrible incident at work, a soldier tried to pull rank. I stood up to him, and the captain, an ex-military type of course, completely humiliated me in front of everyone. They've taken me off duty. I could lose my job over this. Jonathan's reply was quick, a string of outraged emojis followed by text. OMG, Mom, that's insane. You can't let them do that. You should sue them for creating a hostile work environment. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The system is rigged for them. Don't worry. We'll fight this. You did the right thing. His validation was a soothing balm on her wounded pride. Of course she had done the right thing. Jonathan understood. He was smart, a forward thinker. He saw the world for what it was. Her resolve hardened. She wasn't the villain here. She was a whistleblower, a lone voice of dissent against a corrupt system. When they landed in Atlanta, she wouldn't just file a union grievance. She would contact a lawyer. She would go to the press. She would make them pay. Up in seat 22A. Olivia Reed was no longer working on her travel article. She had opened a new document and was typing with a speed and focus she hadn't felt in months. This was the kind of story that found you, the kind that reminded you why you got into journalism in the first place. It was a perfect microcosm of the nation's deepest conflicts, all contained within an airplane cabin. She transcribed the audio she had recorded, her fingers flying across the keys. She detailed the scene with a novelist's eye for detail, the stark contrast between the soldier's quiet dignity and the flight attendant's snarling contempt, the captain's decisive intervention, the raw emotional power of the salute and the subsequent applause. She knew she had to be careful. She needed to get the sergeant's permission to get his side of the story. She also needed a statement from the airline. But the core of the story was undeniable, and she knew with absolute certainty that it would resonate. This was not just about a soldier being denied a drink. It was about respect, prejudice, and the quiet, often unseen chasm between those who serve and those who are served. As the plane began its final descent into Atlanta, the seatbelt sign chimed and the flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing. Kevin, the young flight attendant, discreetly handed Jack a piece of paper. On it was Captain Miller's personal phone number. "The captain wanted you to have this. Kevin whispered, "in case you need anything or for your report to the airline. He said he will be your witness." Jack nodded his thanks, folding the paper and tucking it securely into his jacket pocket. He had no intention of filing a report. He just wanted to get off this plane, get his connecting flight to Columbus, and disappear. The last thing he wanted was more drama. But the story was no longer his. It had taken on a life of its own, captured in the audio file on Olivia Reed's phone and in the memories of 200 passengers. As the wheels touched down on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson, the jolt seemed to signal not an end, but a beginning. The turbulence on the flight was over, but the fallout was just about to begin. And it would spread further, and with more devastating consequences than anyone on board could possibly imagine. The moment they were at the gate, Olivia Reed was in motion. She knew she had a small window of opportunity. She quickly packed her laptop and moved down the aisle, positioning herself to intercept Sergeant Carter as he deplaned. She caught up to him in the bustling terminal, his uniformed figure a point of stillness in the swirling river of travelers. "Sergeant Carter," she called out, trying to sound professional and not like the adrenaline-fueled reporter she was. Jack turned, his face guarded. "Yes, my name is Olivia Reed. I'm a journalist." She held out her business card. "I was on the flight. I saw what happened, and I have to say I was incredibly moved by your composure and by the captain's actions. I think it's an important story that people need to hear." Jack looked at the card, then back at her face. The last thing he wanted was his face plastered all over the internet. "With all due respect, ma'am, I'd rather just forget about it." I understand that Olivia said, her tone gentle but persistent. "And I will respect your privacy completely. I don't even need to use your name if you don't want me to. But what happened up there, it wasn't right. And the way Captain Miller handled it was extraordinary. Letting stories like this slide is how that kind of behavior is allowed to continue. Please, just let me tell the story. I won't sensationalize it. I'll just report the facts." Jack hesitated. He thought of other soldiers, younger ones who might not have the years of experience and discipline to handle a situation like that with such restraint. He thought about how a small act of disrespect could be the final straw for someone already carrying a heavy burden. Maybe she was right. "Okay," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "You can tell the story. But please try to focus on the captain. He was the one who did the right thing." "I will," Olivia promised. "Thank you, Sergeant." He gave a curt nod and disappeared into the crowd on his way to his connecting flight, eager to leave the incident behind him. Olivia, however, was just getting started. She found a quiet corner of the terminal connected to the airport Wi-Fi and began to write. She uploaded the audio file to her cloud, transcribed the key quotes, and wrote with a fury. She emailed the Global Voyager Airlines Media Relations Department for a comment, not expecting a quick reply. She framed the story exactly as she had witnessed it, a straightforward account of prejudice met with decisive leadership. She titled it, "A Salute at 37,000 Feet. How a Pilot's Stand Against a Crew Member's Bigotry Honored a Soldier and a Nation." She didn't have a major outlet to publish it with immediately, so she posted it on her personal blog and shared the link on her social media accounts, tagging several larger news aggregators and veterans organizations. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then it got a few dozen shares, 100, 1,000. A veterans advocacy group with 2 million followers retweeted it. A popular conservative commentator shared it on Facebook. A liberal news anchor posted the link calling Captain Miller a true leader. The story had struck a rare unifying chord across the political spectrum. It was a story not about politics, but about basic human decency. By the time Jack landed in Columbus, his phone was buzzing with notifications. A friend from his unit had sent him the link. His face wasn't in the article, and his name was withheld as promised, but the details were unmistakable. The story was everywhere. Back in Atlanta, the Global Voyager Airlines corporate office was in full-blown crisis mode. Captain Miller had filed a comprehensive incident report the moment he landed a scathing indictment of Brenda Sullivan's behavior. Combined with Olivia's viral article, which was now the #1 trending topic on Twitter, the airline was facing a PR nightmare of epic proportions. Their social media channels were flooded with outrage. Calls for Brenda's immediate termination were deafening. Calls for a public commendation for Captain Miller were equally loud. Brenda Sullivan, blissfully unaware of the digital firestorm, was in a lawyer's office in downtown Atlanta, spinning her tale of workplace harassment. Her lawyer, a smarmy man who specialized in opportunistic lawsuits, was rubbing his hands together, smelling a hefty settlement. "This is gold, Brenda," he was saying. "A lone woman standing up to the oppressive military culture. We can frame this as a free speech issue. You were just expressing your personal convictions." It was then that Brenda's phone began to melt down. Friends and family were sending her the link to Olivia's article. She read it, her face draining of color. The story was all there, but it was twisted, told from their perspective. They were making her out to be a monster. "They're lying," she shrieked, shoving the phone in her lawyer's face. "He was the one who was aggressive." The lawyer read the article, his expression shifting from glee to concern. He read the quotes, the description of her actions, the part about the captain's salute. He scrolled down to the comments section, a torrent of thousands upon thousands of messages, calling his new client a vile bigot. His dreams of a massive payday began to evaporate. "Brenda," he said slowly, "this complicates things." An hour later, Brenda received a call from a stern-faced woman in Global Voyager's HR department. "Ms. Sullivan," the voice said, devoid of any warmth pursuant to the events on Flight 287, and Captain Miller's official report, "You are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full investigation. You are not to report for any scheduled duties, and your company credentials have been deactivated." The line went dead. Brenda stared at her phone in stunned silence. Suspended. Investigated. The world was spinning. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She was the victim. Why couldn't anyone see that her son Jonathan's words of encouragement felt a million miles away? The viral story had become a vector, carrying a narrative she couldn't control, and the infection of public opinion was spreading faster than she could have ever imagined. The consequences were just beginning. The internal investigation at Global Voyager Airlines was swift and merciless. They pulled Brenda Sullivan's entire file, a thick manila folder filled with 2.5 decades of service records. At first glance, it looked unremarkable years of satisfactory performance reviews, peppered with the occasional minor write-up for tardiness or a uniform infraction. But the investigative team, led by a sharp, no-nonsense HR executive named Harrison Black, knew where to look. They cross-referenced her record with passenger complaints over the last 5 years. A pattern began to emerge. It was subtle, a collection of complaints that on their own had been dismissed as minor or subjective. A complaint from a passenger with a thick Eastern European accent who felt he was being ignored and treated rudely. A complaint from a woman wearing a hijab, who claimed Brenda had aggressively questioned her about her carry-on bag when others were not. A complaint from a young black man who said the flight attendant had accused him of trying to get free drinks. Each incident had been a he said, she said situation, and with a lack of concrete evidence, Brenda had always received the benefit of the doubt. But now, in the glaring light of the incident with Sergeant Carter, these scattered data points formed a disturbing constellation of behavior. Brenda wasn't just having a bad day on Flight 287. She was a serial offender whose bigotry was usually just subtle enough to remain deniable. Captain Miller's report was the nail in her coffin. It was meticulous, professional, and damning. He had even secured written statements from Kevin and another flight attendant corroborating the entire exchange. The airline now had an ironclad case. Their legal team advised that firing her was not a risk. Keeping her would be the real liability. While the corporate machinery was grinding away, Olivia Reed was experiencing the strange, disorienting rush of a story-gone supernova. Her blog traffic had crashed her server twice. She had interview requests from every major news network. She had done a few phone interviews, always careful to keep the focus on the positive actions of the captain and the quiet professionalism of the soldier. But her journalistic instincts told her there was more to the story. Brenda Sullivan's hatred had felt too specific, too personal. It wasn't just casual rudeness. It was a deep-seated animosity. Olivia wanted to understand why. She started digging. She ran a background check on Brenda Sullivan. It was mostly unremarkable: a mortgage, a car loan, a clean criminal record. But she found the name of her son, Jonathan Sullivan. A quick search of his name brought up a few articles about a tech startup he had founded a few years ago that had quickly failed. Then she found something else. Jonathan Sullivan was the founder and CEO of a non-profit organization called the Patriots' Promise Foundation. The foundation's website was slick, filled with stock photos of smiling soldiers and waving American flags. Its mission statement was full of buzzwords about empowering veterans, providing financial assistance, and honoring our nation's heroes. It all seemed laudable, if a bit generic. But something felt off to Olivia. The About Us page was vague, and the financial disclosures were nowhere to be found. She cross-referenced the foundation's name with a database of registered charities. The Patriots' Promise Foundation was registered, but its non-profit status was listed as pending review by the IRS, a common tactic for organizations that wanted the appearance of legitimacy without the oversight. Her heart began to beat faster. She started a new line of inquiry. She searched for any news articles or complaints related to the foundation. For a while, she found nothing. Then she stumbled upon a small article in a local Ohio newspaper from 6 months prior. The headline read, "Local Gold Star Family Warns of Potential Charity Scam." Olivia's blood ran cold. She read the article, her eyes scanning the text with feverish intensity. The article detailed how the grieving parents of a recently killed soldier had been contacted by a foundation that promised to help them with funeral expenses. The foundation had set up an online fundraiser in their son's name, but the family had never seen a dime of the money. When they tried to contact the foundation, their calls went unanswered. The name of the family was Peterson. The name of their son was Specialist Michael Peterson. Olivia felt like she had been punched in the gut. It couldn't be. She quickly pulled up the notes from her brief conversation with Sergeant Carter. He was on his way home to attend the memorial service for his friend, Specialist Michael Peterson. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. Brenda Sullivan, the woman who had treated a uniformed soldier with such utter contempt, had a son who was actively preying on the families of fallen soldiers. The very soldier she had disrespected, Jack Carter, was on his way to honor the memory of a man whose family had allegedly been victimized by her son's fraudulent charity. The irony was so profound, so devastating it was almost poetic. This was no longer a story about a rude flight attendant. It was a story about a sprawling, deeply personal hypocrisy. A story about a woman whose misguided hatred for a symbol had blinded her to the very real evil festering in her own home. Olivia picked up her phone. She had a new set of calls to make. First, to the Peterson family to confirm the details of their story. Second, to a contact she had at the FBI's white-collar crime division. The thread she had pulled on was not just unraveling a flight attendant's career. It was unraveling a criminal enterprise. And the fallout was about to become catastrophic. The memorial service for specialist Michael Peterson was held in a small, packed church in the heart of Ohio. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and sorrow. Jack Carter, in his immaculate dress uniform, sat in the front pew with Michael's parents, a stoic pillar of support for the grieving couple. He had delivered the eulogy just moments before, his voice thick with emotion, but never breaking as he spoke of Michael's courage, his humor, and his unwavering loyalty. He had presented the folded flag to Michael's mother, her trembling hands accepting the weight of the nation's gratitude and her own unbearable loss. As the service concluded and people began to file out, Jack's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something compelled him to answer. It was Olivia Reed. "Sergeant Carter," she said, her voice urgent and strained. "I am so sorry to bother you at a time like this. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't critically important." "What is it?" Jack asked, stepping away from the crowd. Olivia took a deep breath and laid it all out. Her investigation into Brenda Sullivan, the discovery of her son Jonathan, the fraudulent Patriots Promise Foundation, and the gut-wrenching connection to the Peterson family. Jack listened in stunned silence, the world around him seeming to fade away. The anger he had suppressed on the flight, the anger he had pushed down for years, surged through him with the force of a flash flood. The disrespect on the plane was one thing. It was an insult to him, to the uniform. But this was a desecration. To prey on a family in their darkest hour of grief, to use the memory of a fallen soldier as bait in a cheap, despicable scam. It was a level of depravity he could barely comprehend, and it was the son of the woman who had looked at him with such hatred. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "I have spoken to the Petersons' local reporter, and I have a source at the FBI who has confirmed an active investigation is being launched. Based on my findings," Olivia confirmed. "The story is breaking in an hour. I wanted you to hear it from me first." Jack thanked her and hung up the phone, his mind reeling. He looked back at Michael's parents, who were accepting condolences from friends and neighbors. He knew this news would be another devastating blow. But it was also a form of justice, a vindication for the trust they had lost. Back in Atlanta, Brenda Sullivan was at her lawyer's office when the news broke. Her suspension had become a termination. A formal letter from Global Voyager cited a pattern of discriminatory behavior and gross professional misconduct. Her lawyer was advising her on the futility of a wrongful termination suit when his own phone buzzed with a news alert. He opened the link. The headline was from a national news outlet, and it featured a picture of a smiling Jonathan Sullivan next to the logo of the Patriots Promise Foundation. The headline read, "Son of controversial flight attendant accused of defrauding Gold Star families." Brenda snatched the phone from his hand. She read the article, her eyes widening in horror. It was all there. Olivia Reed's meticulous reporting laid out the entire scheme. It named the Peterson family. It quoted fraud experts. It detailed how Jonathan had used the foundation as his personal piggy bank, funding a lavish lifestyle, with money meant for the families of heroes. It mentioned that the initial investigation into Jonathan was sparked by the journalist's follow-up on the now infamous flight incident. The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. Her son, her brilliant entrepreneurial son, who was better than all those grunts in uniform, was a common thief. A ghoul who picked the pockets of the grieving. Her fierce protective pride, the entire foundation of her worldview, crumbled into dust. The soldier she had scorned was a man of honor mourning a friend. Her son, whom she had adored, was a parasite. Her righteous anger, her sense of victimhood, all of it evaporated, replaced by a shame so profound it was physically nauseating. She had created this. Her blind adoration, her willingness to fund his startups without question, her own bitter prejudices, they had provided the cover and the capital for him to commit these monstrous acts. The media firestorm she had dreaded had arrived, but it wasn't about her anymore. It was about her son, and by extension, her own catastrophic failure as a parent and a human being. The karma was not just that she lost her job. The karma was the complete and utter annihilation of her self-deception. It was the knowledge that her actions on that flight, her petty act of hatred, had inadvertently lit the fuse on the bomb that destroyed her own family. Days later, federal agents arrested Jonathan Sullivan at his luxury apartment, an apartment likely paid for with stolen donations. The case was a slam dunk. The evidence was overwhelming. Jack Carter, having stayed an extra week to support the Peterson family through the initial shock of the news, finally returned to his own quiet home. He read the headlines about the arrest, about the dozens of other families who were now coming forward as victims of Jonathan's scam. He felt no sense of victory, only a profound sadness. The world was a complicated, messy place, but sometimes, just sometimes, the threads of justice, however tangled, managed to unravel in a way that revealed the undeniable truth. A salute at 37,000 feet had started it all. A simple act of respect that had set in motion a chain of events that exposed a deep-seated rot, bringing a bitter but necessary harvest of truth and consequences. In the end, this story is a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, can have unforeseen and far-reaching consequences. For Brenda Sullivan, a single act of prejudice born from years of resentment didn't just cost her a job. It unearthed a devastating truth that shattered her entire world. For Captain Miller, a single act of courage and decency didn't just rectify a wrong. It triggered a cascade of justice for victims who had been suffering in silence. And for Sergeant Jack Carter, a quiet hero who asked for nothing but a glass of water, his dignity in the face of disrespect became the catalyst for it all. This story shows that the character we reveal in moments of conflict defines us, and that the universe in its own time and in its own way ensures that everyone gets exactly what they have earned. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of karma, courage, and consequence. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the captain's incredible actions.